So let's now talk a little bit about the construction of the supply curve. So hopefully you guys kind of, at least at a very fundamental level, at least it should make intuitive sense that you should undertake an action if and only if the marginal benefits of an action exceed that of the marginal cost. So that's basically how we build up both the supply and the demand curve. So the example which I go through in the slides is this lady named Steph. Okay. And the idea here is that she has two productive activities. The first is apples. She can collect apples. And the second is that she can catch fish. Okay. So associated with these two activities is obviously some sort of effort, right? Or some sort of cost. So remember, costs are not just simply dollar value. It could be in the form of time. So in the example that is given in the slides, what we have is time. Okay, so the first bushel of apple, okay, we have, it takes 1 hour. For the second of apple, it takes 1.5 hours. And the third apple, it takes 2 hours, and etc., etc. Okay. So how about for fish? Let's just kind of simplify the analysis and just say that for any unit of fish, whether it's the first or second or third, it always takes you 1 hour to catch 1 unit of fish. And this is a constant. Okay. So now that we have these are what we call your productivities. And this is your productivity. Okay. We can then think about, well, what's the marginal benefit? What's the marginal cost? In some ways, you could almost think of this as a bit of your marginal cost, isn't it? It's telling you the time it takes to collect these units. So for marginal benefit, what can we do with fish and apples? Well, we can obviously sell them. And let's say that the price of fish is $1.90. Okay. And the price of, so that should be apple. So my mistake. And fish, that is $1. Okay. So 50 cents. Okay. So the question then becomes, okay, so this is what we can sell it at. Okay, so what is our decision to supply? Okay, you can kind of intuitively see where this is going, right? At least, hopefully, you can see it. What you want to do as Steph is to compare, well, if I were to spend 1 hour, right, how many units of apple can I actually get? Okay, well, I can get the first unit of apple, but what can I actually do with that hour? What's the opportunity cost of that hour? The alternative is, of course, I can use that to obtain 1 unit of fish. Okay, so then what we want to do is we want to compare, okay, apple, what's the marginal benefit? Well, the marginal benefit here is I can sell it for $1.90, so 1.9. And for fish, it's 0.5. Okay, so then that is basically our comparison. We want to compare, well, if I were to get 1 unit of apple, the marginal benefit I would get is $1.90. But what's the cost? Well, I could have used that hour to obtain 1 unit of fish, in which case I give up 50 cents. So given that analysis of comparing apple and fish for the first hour, I would want to basically collect an apple. So then let's say, well, how about if I obtain a second apple? Okay, let's think about apple 2. So the second apple. It takes 1.5 hours. Okay, so how about fish, right? for that second apple, I have to spend 1.5 hours. So how many fish would I be able to get? Well, it would be 1.5 fish, right? So what I want to compare is 1.5 fish to 1 apple. Okay, so what is the benefit I would get? Well, if I went for apple, I would get my $1.90. If I look at fish, what do I give up? Well, I would give up 1.5 fish, in which case it's 75 cents. So again, I would go for the second apple. Okay. So again, the analysis here is this type of comparison between what I give up in terms of apples or fish, and I'm comparing it to the alternate. So if I'm considering what I need to give up, for example, the first hour for fish, what do I need to give up for fish if I'm comparing to apples? So we're basically applying this idea of opportunity costs. Okay. So if we were to continue, okay, with this, okay, you can basically then understand that what we eventually will do is, well, at some point, given that these productivities keep increasing, at some point you would say that, okay, I'm going to stop supplying apples and devote it to fish. And that's basically what happens. So then for this at $1.90, out of memory, so I think it was in the slides, I think the optimal number of apples was basically 2 units, I think. I can't remember exactly. But hopefully you guys get the idea as to what you need to do. But more importantly, right, what we're really interested when we're constructing the supply curve is you hopefully should remember that we have price and you have quantity here, and this is always your supply curve, right? So we've only really talked about what happens in terms of our decision to supply at a given price, right? So all we've done at this point is, if we consider the market for apples, is to say that, well, at $1.90, there's some Q unit here. So what do we then need to do? Well, what we need to do is we need to vary the price, don't we? To basically identify other points of this curve. And that is effectively what you'd be doing. If you hold, for example, fish constant, for example, and you vary this and say that, well, what would happen if it goes up to $2? Or, for example, it goes down to $1.50. What would then happen? Well, you'd have to go through the same analysis and understand, well, how many units would I want to supply? At $1.90, we know that we definitely want to supply the second unit, right? What if the price dropped to $1? How would that affect the analysis? So this is what you basically need to do in terms of constructing the supply curve. Again, it comes back to the very fundamental concept of comparing marginal cost and marginal benefit. So hopefully that should be relatively clear now as to how you construct the supply curve.